Shalom, friends, there at All Saints in Clayton and whoever else is watching this from elsewhere. I'm Bob Mendelsohn. I get to direct Jews for Jesus in Australia, New Zealand, and currently I am in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm spending Hanukkah here and Christmas, and you know the government said if I left I had to be gone for at least 3 months, so I've been all over the country, Washington, D.C., and Houston, and Kansas City, Iowa, all over Tennessee and Georgia. Anyway, you don't want to hear my travel log. You want to hear about what God is up to and how the light of Hanukkah and the light of Messiah somehow are merged and morphed, and we're going to talk about that as we talk about Hanukkah, that festival that we use that Chanukiah to explain. I love this holiday. I grew up as an Orthodox Jew in Kansas City, and so for me, as the winter was approaching and Hanukkah was approaching, I knew that there were gifts coming my way. That's the reality for a young lad, is that I wanted the presents. We had a tradition of 8 nights and 8 gifts. They weren't sizable gifts, but whatever I got, it was better than what I didn't have before. So that was good. And it was family time. Now, you know that in the States that it gets dark as winter hits, think July for us back home. This idea of darkness was increasing. And I want to talk about some darknesses into which the light of God needs to be manifest, I suppose. I want to talk about 3 different types of darkness, if you'll let me: the darkness of ignorance, the darkness of sin, and the darkness of hopelessness or despair. And I want to talk about how light bursts in on that. During this season, as you are readying, not just for the silly season, but for Christmas and New Year's, and maybe some time at the beach, and maybe some time out of lockdown. In America and other Northern Hemisphere countries, it's getting darker and darker earlier and earlier, whether we have daylight savings or not. So at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening, it's dark. And you'll see the Christmas lights abounding in this neighborhood. You'll see Hanukkah celebrated with the lights of the candles. We'll talk about that as I light them later. You'll see lights of Advent wreaths, perhaps in your tradition and maybe some others. So there's lights all over the place. And lights make sense in the midst of darkness. You don't take a torch and go outside at midday and flash it up into the sun and think it's going to make any difference or matter at all, because, well, light makes sense in darkness. So let's talk about these darknesses. The darkness of ignorance. The more we know we don't know. That's what I'm learning as I age, as I experience life and death more in Australia and around the globe. We know so much. Technology has increased. They say in our telephone that we have more data, more capacity than they had when they put the man on the moon in 1969. What? Yeah, there's more data. We know much more about so much more. You want to know something, you wonder, you give up wondering and you just, hey, Google or whatever you do to research. Back when I was a kid, you had to ride your bicycle to the library and open a book, but now you just yell at your phone and out comes some data. So we know. Daniel chapter 12 says, in the end, that knowledge will increase and men will run to and fro. I see that everywhere, wherever I travel. And yet, the more we know we don't know. Science is from the Latin word for knowledge. And we've increased in science, but we still don't know how to get along with our neighbor. We still don't even know our neighbor. We've got higher and higher fences and walls between us and not even our neighbor. How about the people with whom you work or you used to work? cubby after cubby after cubby of separated lives. We don't know how to get along. We don't know our neighbors. Neighborhoods have become hoods because we don't need or know our neighbor. We don't know how to love one another, but we know so much. Into that darkness, the darkness of ignorance, we need the light of the knowledge of the glory of God. In fact, my Jewish people are at the top of so much in academia. We are high in prize winning, in Nobel Prizes, in science and mathematics, and so many ventures and categories and genres. But we don't know how to get along with our Gentile neighbor or the Palestinian or whatever we call those folks who are our neighbors there in the land of Israel. We know so much and we know so little. We need the light of God to come with his knowledge and help us see and communicate and bring good news in how we relate to one another. Isaiah said, "Arise, shine, your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen on you." And we sing of that at this time. Perhaps you've read that in your early Gospels story reading in this Advent preparation time about Nunc Dimittis, that is, now let your servant. This is Simeon in the temple holding a baby. He's waited so long for the one who's called the hope or consolation of Israel. He says, now let your servant depart in peace. For mine eyes have seen your salvation, a light to lighten Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. That's what we need in this time. The second darkness into which the light must appear is the darkness of sin. I'm a preacher. I should talk about sin. Now, we modify the word sin in our day. We want to make it a little less rigid, a little less Bible bashing. We want to make it a little more gentle. We want to say, well, it's not that you sin, it's that you fall short. It's not that you sin in committing adultery, you just had an affair. Or it's not that you stole and therefore you should have the punishment of a thief, but you just took things that didn't exactly belong to you. So we want to modulate the penalty by modulating the description. But the Bible is clear as clear can be. Sin is lawlessness, and it brings its commensurate darkness. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, Isaiah said. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and his name would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. If you want that Prince of Peace to come to you, you have to admit that you're sitting in darkness, the darkness of sin. If you didn't ever admit your sin, you're the last one in your pew to do so. Everybody else in your pew knows that you're a sinner. Your mother, I know, it's a sad thing to think, knows that you're a sinner. Your mother, I should even be careful, is a sinner. Everybody I know is a sinner. Good people, bad people, all people. We all fall short. We all sin. We all do things that are for us and not for our neighbor. We all do things for us and not for God. We are filled with the need for self-approval and others' approval. We long for the credit to be given to us, and we long for the praise of men. The Apostle Paul said, if I longed for the praise of men, I wouldn't have the approval of God. No, the darkness of sin is rampant. It's shown in murders at schools just this week, again in Michigan. Another teenage boy shooting, 4 people dead, another 6 people wounded. Maybe some of them are critical. I look at this all over the country, all over the globe, as people know more and hate more. Yeshua said, at the end, the love of many will grow cold. And what is sin but living for you and not loving your neighbor as yourself? It's living for you and not loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Into the darkness of sin, the light of forgiveness has to come. the light of restitution, repair, getting right with neighbor, getting right with God. The Apostle John, who wrote much about love, said that if we confess our sin, He, God, is faithful to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Confess our sin. What does that mean? Does that mean, God, I want to tell you some things that you don't know, and I'm going to confess them, and now you're going to be surprised. God's not surprised. God knows exactly what you've done. Confess means to agree together with. I'm confessing that what you've said as sin is sin, and I was wrong, and you're right. I agree together with God that my sin is apparent, and I was wrong, and I apologize. And then I want to make things right, like Zacchaeus had to do, like so many of us had to do, to make things right. There's a third darkness, and it's one that is so sad to report, the darkness of despair or hopelessness. I think one of the saddest statistics I ever read every year at this time is that December is the month with the most suicides of any month of the year. It makes no sense to me. It's the most wonderful time of the year for some people. It's not the most wonderful time if you're alone. It's not the most wonderful time necessarily, even if you're in the midst of a family, but you are separated from them, or you are distant socially from people with whom you're hanging. It's just a lonely, lonely time. And there are more suicides at this time of year. It makes sense it saddens me to report that it makes sense in the darkness of a cold winter's night. But it doesn't make sense in Australia, New Zealand, where we've got bounty, where we've got pleasure, where we've got the beach, where we've got support from one another. We've got our cricket or our footy team. We've got all kinds of things that give us happiness and pleasure. But there's a despair because we've put our hope on things that fall through. Despair happens because we don't have it all together. Despair happens because we are hopeless, and we need to admit that and say we're without hope, but our hope is in God. The psalmist says, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disturbed within me? Hope in God. Again, I will praise his name." The psalmist understood that our hope was not to be fixed on temporary, ephemeral things. Our hope was to be fixed in the one who's got the whole world in his hands. We need the light of God to come into our darkness, preserve us, save us, excite us, deliver us, redeem us to himself. And maybe that's where the story of Hanukkah comes in. Hanukkah is the story of a few people going up against a big group of people and winning. Let me say it to you this way. This took place in 168 BCE, a couple hundred years before Yeshua stood up and said, "I'm the light of the world." Under the Syrian Greeks, under the man named Antiochus Epiphanes, he called himself Epiphanes, the Jews called him Epimanes, that means madman. There had been a dissolution of the Jewish religion. It took place there in Jerusalem and all the environs, that Antiochus, who was the ruler of the area in those days, used Israel as a punching bag, if you will, between him and the Egyptians up from the south. They dominated, they ran the turf, and found great pleasure in setting up statues to Zeus and to Antiochus. Made the people worship, dissolved the Jewish religion as a wrong religion, as an out-of-bounds religion. And they said, you better bow down and worship to Zeus. they did some horrible things in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, including sacrificing to Zeus there with a pig, slaughter the pig's blood all over the sacred place. You can imagine how horrible and desecrating that is to a Jewish person. Mattathias Maccabee was living in Modin, just up north of Jerusalem, when he heard about this, because they marched into town with these mobile statues of Antiochus or Zeus and said, bow down to him. And he said, no, I'm not going to. And they were shocked that anyone would go up against them. Mattathias had several sons. He called them to stand with him. Whoever's with God, let him stand with me, was the word. And all of a sudden, there was a revolt, the Maccabean revolt. Mattathias stood up against them, against the Greeks. There was some significant response within the Maccabees and some friends, but nothing really compared to the power of the world power of the day. Look, it would be like your year 7 footy team going up against the all-stars of Aussie Rules. No. Put the ball down, boys. You're not going to go up against those boys and win. You're just not going to. But the Maccabees believed that they could. And they, after a 3-year battle here and there, they won the battle and pushed the Syrian Greeks out of the Holy Temple, out of Jerusalem, and they went to cleanse it. They went to dedicate the temple back to God. Dedicate in Hebrew is Hanukkah. It's the festival of dedication. You read about it in John chapter 10, when Yeshua is walking in the portico of the temple there in Jerusalem. It says it's winter. It's the festival of dedication. John 10, verse 22. And Yeshua uses that time to describe himself as equal with deity. That shocked the people. It got him in big trouble. It got him towards the cross. Hanukkah is a great season of year for me. And I'm going to use this Chanukiah, this menorah with 9 branches, to show you some things. The celebration of Hanukkah began last Sunday night, and it concludes tonight in Melbourne and around the world. And on the last night, we will light all of the Chanukiah, that is, all of the candles on this special menorah. We'll light it like this. So the father of the house or someone of age, we don't let the children play too often with the candles, with the matches. But in our house, a lot of the children will either take turns. One night it'll be this one, it'll be that one. And they will light the Chanukiah, they'll light the menorah, they'll light the candles and sing the prayers and bring light to this special festival that happens every year in December. So it's a special time, a wonderful time. They gather around, they get presents every night. They like that part. Well, you can imagine the amount of light this is up in the northern hemisphere, where at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the evening, it's already dark. Think July for us. So all of the candles are lit. Tonight, it'll be Sunday night. It'll be the last night of Hanukkah. And all of these will make a story together. This one that I use to light the others, the one that the father or someone will light, is called the shamas. It means servant. The servant candle then lights the others. It's always a fun thing to watch the kids try to light them and help each other to do so. But the shamas never gets counted. There are 8 candles you can see because this is the 8th night tonight. Well, why do we have 9? The servant never gets counted, but actually is useful to make the others well lit. My wife keeps a spotless home in our house wherever we are, in Sydney or beyond. We used to live in New York City, and for years, she would make me go into the apartment and turn on the lights before she would come in. What was that about? Well, no matter what we did to keep those little cockroaches away, they seemed to own New York City. So I'd turn on the light and the scamper would happen. You'd hear the scamper of little insects all over the apartment to get to a dark place. Cockroaches don't like light. You know, each of these other candles stood there and welcomed the shamas lighting it. One of the things I think about in this time is when light approaches you, when the truth approaches you, when the knowledge of God, the gospel of Messiah comes to you, you have a choice. You can either be a candle or you can be a cockroach. A cockroach runs away from the light. A candle says, light me. I guess what I want for you in a takeaway today is that you would say, Lord, light me. I was giving a sermon similar to this some years ago, and I was shaking hands after the service with the congregants, and a fellow came up to me and said, I said, how are you? And he said, saved and saving. Now, I'd never heard that before, but I think I understood what he meant. And maybe in light of the Hanukkah, we could say, how you doing? And you'd say, I'm lit and lighting. You know, God lit me. He made me a light to the nations. I want to go be lighting others. Now, right now, I've got this Hanukkah sitting here, and right here is the street. There you can see, is the window to the street. So every night when we light this, we are required actually to have the candles lit and visible on the street so that passersby can know that Nes Gadol Hayasham, a great miracle happened there. We are born to testify. Robert Louis Stevenson was a young lad, and he used to be fascinated by the lamp lighters out on the street corner, on the streets in his neighborhood. One day, Stevenson's father came by and saw him at night looking out through the window, and he said, Bobby, what are you doing? He said, I'm watching them punch some holes in the darkness. I like that. And maybe that'll speak to you in this day as well. What are we doing in Melbourne? What are we doing in Sydney? What are we doing across Australia and Anzac and around the globe? What are we doing to take the light of the glory of Messiah and taking it to a dark and darkening world? Let me encourage you there at All Saints and wherever you go. And maybe you're watching this from your home, or you're watching this from jail, or you're watching it in Mozambique. I don't know who's watching, but wherever you are, let's punch some holes in the darkness. Let's take the light of Messiah and proclaim him to the Jew first, and don't forget the Gentile. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Messiahmas, and Shalom.